I'm hoping later this year to take over the whole space and have Los Lobos come in and then have some young kids come in and do the Richie Valens songs with them as the backing band.
I got you on that.
Yeah. And it would be amazing to do that. And I have the support of the organization. So, I mean, those guys are almost in their 80s now. Yeah. I think people forget that Los Lobos formed in the mid 70s and really, didn't break until the 90s, besides their appearance in La Bamba. So I'm hoping that will help us stand out, Initially, I was just publishing things that were interesting to Sybil and I and my other partners. But I think as time's gone on, we've really, if we're going to stay in Los Angeles, we've been trying to figure out, how do we root this publishing house in a way that deals with the actual culture of Los Angeles. And in the last few years, I'd say a quarter of the books tie into LA history in a certain way that kind of no one else is doing that. There's Angel City Press, which is now owned by the Public Library, and they do a great job of doing sort of a deep dive into certain LA historical things. Dub Lab ended up being a great sort of centerpiece because then after that we did Lumpin', which was an underground magazine that I grew up in Chicago reading. And it's this idea of taking something from the print era and the pre-digital age, or even in the digital age, but then repurposing it into some sort of object. I don't know if you know the website Aquarium Drunkard. It's one of the best music websites of the last 20 years. They have an amazing show on Sirius XM of the same name. Justin Gage is the founder and the editor. He has such great musical taste. I'm working with them now. And again, some of these things are not commercial, so we have to use the nonprofit and go raise the money through grants and through private donations. But they've got this, it's their 20th anniversary coming up, and they have this 20-year archive of just incredible interviews with all these musicians. And it's all behind a paywall now. They unfortunately, ran into the problem of the advertising never really meted out with most of the digital age. And that was the hope initially, was that the digital advertising would replace the print advertising so that people could still get paid to be journalists and to have music critics. The guy who actually does all the music writing for In Sheep's Clothing is the former pop music critic for the LA Times, Randall Roberts, who's an amazing guy. A lot of music critics, because they're just not paying anyone anymore to do that. He's now got a nice journalism job at the University of Missouri in Columbia, Missouri, Mizzou as it's formerly known, or as it's still known. And that's one of the famous journalism schools in this country. And, he had to basically take that job because living here and working at the LA Times, they basically did buyouts of anyone who made any real money so that everybody is stuck in freelance hell or they're wearing 4 hats. I mean, a lot of people have asked me, why have you not gone back to working at a major newspaper or magazine when obviously you've created this body of work that would probably make it easier for you to get a job doing what you're already doing, but for a bigger publication. Right. And part of it is that, yes, it could potentially pay me twice as much money. But what I've seen happen with a lot of my mentors, for instance, is most of them took the buyout because they just were given a buyout option, and I would have probably done the same thing if I was their age. But they've consolidated 4 people's jobs into one person's job. So you can't really do a good job.
You're preaching to the choir here.
So it's you're the editor of this section and it's a prestigious section, and say you're the music editor of the LA Times and you edit all the music coverage in the newspaper. You're wearing so many hats that you have to cut every corner imaginable to be able to try to do the best job you can editing down whatever the work is.
Yeah, and you said in another, this is also in -8, you were saying how with those jobs, you can end up just being on social media all day and not actually doing what you want to do. You're trying to promote all your stuff, and then you get home and you're exhausted and you can't even do your pet project. And that's what you do for a living now.
That's why I'd rather make less money and have control over my own schedule, because it's there isn't...
You want a life, too.
Yeah, the payday isn't worth it. And also, the compromises I've seen my friends have to make, especially in this last election cycle where the guy who owns the LA Times, who's this Chinese billionaire, like Bezos, kind of outed himself as MAGA. He wouldn't endorse Kamala Harris, even though the editorial board is supposed to have independence. Then he put out a statement sort of saying, something similar to what Bezos said about the Washington Post. We're no longer going to write about, various things politically. We're only going to write about free markets and liberty, which is a code word for late capitalist greed. Free markets. I mean, we really are living in an Orwellian dystopia in that
Beyond.
Because what is being told to us is actually the opposite of what is really it means. I mean, a perfect example is like intelligent design is a phrase used in Texas to teach creationism in public schools when there's nothing intelligent or design about it.
Right.
And science debunks all of it.
Right.
And yet that's kind of where we're at. And
it's going back to keeping people stupid.
It is keeping people stupid. And when you say free markets, there is no such thing as free markets. Free markets are rigged markets through a stock market that's completely rigged. And I would love if there were free markets, because then you'd have real competition, but you don't. And this is why, and I'm seeing it firsthand, like you can say it's democratic socialism all day. There's 20 record shops in every neighborhood of Berlin. There's maybe one in every neighborhood here.
Yeah.
One encouraging thing about having moved here almost, 13 years ago this month, is there's probably double or triple the amount of record stores than when I got here.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, I'd say there's double, 2 or 3 times fewer bookstores. But it shows that like the record stores of the future have found their calling. They're either used shops or they're like hyper specialized shops by genre, or they have it curated in such a way. The In Sheep's clothing shop, one of the reasons I'm going to put the records and create some sort of like record nook to the side is like the way they've curated the music is part of what makes it interesting. So you come in and it's a mix of new and used stuff. But if you're a young person, you're going to find out about a bunch of genres you didn't even know about, because they'll have like Japanese minimalism, psych rock, free jazz.
Kind of like how radio used to be.
Yeah.
Be turned on to something you wouldn't typically listen to.
Yeah, I mean, one other funny joke. I think at some point I'm going to start an Instagram handle about the oxymoronic, paradoxical, Orwellian euphemisms that are used that mean the opposite of what they actually state. But Clear Channel, which destroyed radio in this country, along with the Infinity Broadcasting Company, which homogenized all the radio stations.
I'm old enough to remember.
They own iHeartRadio, which is one of the largest podcast networks. And if you look into the history of the company, they had to change their name because the PR was so bad for what they did to radio by turning every station into Jack FM. And then saying things like, we play what we like, when in reality, they play whatever the corporate paymaster tells them to pay. Yeah. There is no free reign of playing anything. I just love how these companies, even the name of the company means the exact opposite of what it should be called. I Destroyed Radio, not iHeartRadio. Because, and people have lost a sense of what really happened.
Yes.
Because we live in Gore Vidal, who obviously was a cranky old lefty.
Yeah.
But I remember in the early aughts, maybe late 90s, he would always say, we're the United States of amnesia. The internet age and the post-digital age have made that point, even more prescient. The idea that...
Hey, we got this Sting song, History Will Teach Us Nothing.
Yeah. Think about the fact that people forgot what the first Trump administration was like, to the point where he was reelected. Granted, the Democrats...
I don't even think they forgot. I just think nobody is aware in their own little safe bubble, which was set up on purpose, and their algorithm is only things they like. And it's getting harder and harder to find the truth. I'm trying to remember when I was in college, what was that? JSTOR. If you wrote a paper, you couldn't just go online or find a magazine. You had to prove that what you're using and sourcing were actual fact. And that's all out the window now. Good friend of mine, Matt Ritchie, he's an English major. We are blown away by every time we go online how many spelling and grammar articles there are. Nobody does sentence diagramming. Nobody knows how to speak correctly. And I get it, and it's funny, but when kids are telling me, oh, that's so cringe, they've forgotten how to talk. They've forgotten how to write, or maybe they never even learned it.
Yeah. I think what's crazy, too, about seeing all those errors, at one point, Sybil, my wife, had an Instagram account called Spot a Typo. And because we were finding egregious errors.
It's crazy.
In the New York Times, in Rolling Stone.
And when I buy books, I'm like, what?
Yeah. And look, nobody's perfect. We've printed stuff that I'm almost like...
mean. It's out of control.
But it's gotten to the point, and the thing that's nuts about the online stuff is you'd think someone would catch it. You can fix it in the digital age.
Yeah.
Whereas once it's printed, you're fucked, right? I remember spelling the jazz musician Jackie Byard's name wrong, and I still have nightmares about it. Or Don Cherry was John Cheery. It was a typo, and I'm still having nightmares about it. But I see it every day, and I'll take a screen grab of it, and it's kind of like an inside joke between Sybil and I, as we'll be like, look, I found 5 typos in the opening paragraph of this Rolling Stone story. I think some of it is the rush to get it up first so that there isn't this kind of fact checking. I mean, they
probably can't pay editors anyway.
Yeah, they can't. Yeah,
it's like you were just saying, one person has 10 jobs.
I can't remember if I told Randy this. Randy's show is so great too. I don't know if you know Randy's band. It's one of my favorite bands. He's in a band called No Age. They're on Drag City now. They were on Sub Pop before. Oh, cool. It's a duo, but they're like it's a really full sounding band for a 2-piece.
Yeah.
And Randy is such and he plays with lots of other people too. He's such an interesting guy. I mean, we were joking because I have Big Table, and we were talking to KCRW, and Bookworm is gone. Mm-hmm. The Organist, which I used to contribute to, which was McSweeney's podcast, which was a great art culture podcast, that's gone. And then DNA, which is design and architecture. Right. That was also a KCRW show. So Alejandro Cohen, who's the founder of Dublab, went over there as a music director like 6 months ago.
Yeah.
When he got there, he helped me create Big Table. And he was like, well, why don't we pitch this to like the podcast person here? Because we stopped doing the show because it just required too much work. And no one was getting paid to do it. And I didn't really care if I got paid, but I wanted to pay like the sound designer and the editor because that stuff was time consuming.
Yeah.
And it looked pretty good. Like, we made a deck, we sent it to him, and then because Trump declared war on public media, most of the public radio stations have preemptively let go tons of people, knowing that they're going to be losing a bunch of funding.
Right.
This stuff is making its way through the courts right now, but it doesn't look like the courts are coming to the defense of most of this stuff. And so the person who was in charge of the podcast was let go, and they froze all new development of anything for the next foreseeable future, or at least for the next year, until they see how things shake out. So now we're back to this point where it's like, oh, go and raise the money for it yourself, and then maybe we can consider doing it. And I think maybe once the bookshop gallery is set up, we could maybe fund it through the proceeds of that, because it wasn't crazy. I mean, it wouldn't be more than maybe $1,000 a week or something to pay everyone to put it together.
Yeah.
It's not like it's going to break the bank.
It's not a lot of money.
But if we had a way to generate revenue from it, as opposed to it just being a cool podcast, we could potentially use it as the podcast for the bookstore itself. It would still be called Big Table, but at the end, we could redirect people to buy those books from us, which then we could take that revenue and put it back into it. Because I started doing it during COVID because everyone was stuck at home, but also like my Rolodex is insane. So I could get all of these people like Warren Ellis, like to have him come on and talk about, he had a book out. I mean, a lot of these musicians are doing books too. I mean, we didn't get to Nick Cave, but he was on the list. So was PJ Harvey. And there aren't really a lot of long form podcasts about books. Most of the book podcasts are about fiction and, novelists and short story writers and poetry. We were sort of specifically doing nonfiction books. So it was books about filmmakers, books about artists, books about musicians. And it was totally filling a void, and we didn't get crazy numbers for like the downloads for each episode, but we were able to do it every other week for like a couple of years. And then it just sort of ran out of steam. I mean, again, like there was this, what we call COVID sympathy money, that during COVID, when bands couldn't tour and artists couldn't show work and authors couldn't go on book tour, wealthy people felt bad, and we were able to raise a shitload of money, for those write-offs. And then when COVID started to abate and like the donor class started to revert back to their usual lifestyle, which involves international travel, buying stuff on Sotheby's. It's not that they stopped giving us money, but they stopped giving us as much money. Right. And a lot of the initiatives we created, we couldn't fund them anymore unless people gave us a certain amount of money to do them. But in there, I sort of discovered the pitfall of where the arts are going in this country, and that it's maybe always been like this, but it's now like this on steroids because of who ends up being the people with the money. It's generational wealth, it's tech, and it's Wall Street. And those are the only 3 categories. Yeah. So then you're stuck basically having to placate those people to give you money charitably. They wouldn't fund it on its own.
It's like painters in the Renaissance.
Yeah. You're basically begging.
And eventually there's going to be a Goya who's like, I've had it.
Yeah, I mean, what's crazy too is a lot of the sort of donor class people, they'll only give me the money if I myself will donate $10,000 of work for free that I can't really afford to do.
Yep.
To do it so that they can feel like in their head I'm meeting them halfway, even though I'm not rich and I didn't make all my money on the rigged stock market, and I didn't make all my money in fantasy land, IP of tech world where you're selling an idea, not an actual business that makes money. I mean, Uber's made no profits.
Yeah.
This driverless cabs you see all over now here, none of that's going to make money for decades. I understand that's where the economy has moved, but there should be economies of scale that don't only work if you get crazy, funny money from Silicon Valley or Wall Street people who, his entire intentions in life. Again, like, this isn't even about politics. It's about believing in arts patronage or not believing in arts patronage.
Being moral.
Yeah, I mean, the quid pro quos I was faced with got me so repulsed that I almost was like, we kept the nonprofit to fund certain projects, but there was a time 5 years ago where I thought, well, maybe this is how we should do it.
Right.
Because then we can keep everything mission oriented. But the thing is, then you're left begging rich people for money also, but in a different way. They have to want the write-off. And if anything happens in the economy, like the tariffs a few months ago,
right,
it's like, pick up their toys and leave.
Everything comes to a standstill.
You have to wait until everything's loosey-goosey again, and they're just making hand over fist crazy amounts of money, and they can afford to park $5 or $10,000 somewhere to help something. It's demoralizing because it's like, you can't raise the money for a for-profit, so then everything becomes about this, this kind of elite charade of saving the world. There's a great Dutch historian that this was maybe one of the first viral YouTube clips I remember seeing, but his name is Rutger Bregman. He's probably maybe 40 now, but someone invited him to Davos, where all the rich people hang out in Switzerland, and they have these, kind of the New World Order meets for what are the industrialists and the tech sociopaths and the Wall Street ghouls going to do with, where's the world heading? What do these thought leaders want? And he gets up there on this panel. I forget who he's on the panel with, but you can look this up on YouTube. And he basically just I think Elon Musk was in the room. He's like, look, all of you guys are rich assholes who don't want to pay proper taxes. And you wouldn't need all this charitable crap if you just paid the taxes.
There you go.
Everything would work. You wouldn't have to have this elite charade of saving the world where you guys get to park your money in whatever charities you want so you can write it all off and be a tax evader if you just paid what Eisenhower was charging people in the 50s when we had the biggest American growth of capitalism in the history of the world after the war.
And he did go on to warn us about the
military industrial complex.
Yeah.
And so you could tell, like, this was one of the first viral moments because everyone in that room, you could hear gasping because it was like Rupert Murdoch was in the room and Elon Musk was in the room, because those Davos things are basically for the mega wealthy to get together and kind of have a fart sniffing contest about who's doing what for which charity to save the world.
Succession.
Yeah, and so of course that guy became famous for that, and he's now published several books since then. I mean, he was basically just like a Dutch historian who just knew the actual truth about capitalism, and that basically, like, starting in the 80s with the deregulation of everything, you see a precipitous drop off in the democratization of the arts. And then you have people being as dumbed down as they are. They don't realize that the reason we won the Cold War wasn't because we had an arms race, but was because the biggest export during the Cold War was American culture. And bringing Dizzy Gillespie and Duke Ellington to Africa in the 60s was the best propaganda you could have. Of course, Trump and his goons have now stopped most of this soft power, which made us look like the good guys, even though we were doing some bad stuff with regards to the stock market and multinational corporations. At least the American export of music and Levi's and books and culture was what we used to win over the rest of the world, that we weren't the bad guys, in this kind of existential crisis between, the communist or fake communist totalitarianism of the Soviets and China. And now, what Trump's done with this stuff, obviously him and his goons wanted to punish China. all they've done is made China look like a more reliable trading partner, even though if you say boo, I mean, they took over Hong Kong during COVID because no one was paying attention. All the bookstalls, every independent bookstore, every independent newspaper in Hong Kong is gone because you will be taken with a bag over your head, beaten, and then taken to a secret prison in Beijing. Maybe not executed, but put into a Chinese gulag if you say anything.
Silenced.
And yet Disney makes all their toys in China. I mean, and a new book just came out about basically the reason China's been given this upper hand on all of tech is because Apple, this company we supposedly love, spent all of their money in the last 20 years training a public in China to build all their stuff through their slave labor system rather than to inform Americans to be able to build these things.
Wow.
And has given them the technological advantage, which of course they've stolen a lot of these secrets for national security reasons,
right,
to prop up their totalitarian police state. Now, we did just make the first book, and it was like book 80, and there was no other way to do it except make it in China. But we've kind of gone out of our way to never do stuff there because it really is, you know, Sybil and I were on a road trip in 99, and I give her major props for picking up the newspaper that day because we were like in Missoula, Montana, going thrift store shopping. And the Battle of Seattle took place a day or two later, and we were close enough where we got to drive there to be there to witness that. And I wasn't really an activist then, but that was sort of the Battle of Seattle, which no one knew at the time was really going to have such an impact on what we're talking about now. But that was because they let China into the World Trade Organization, which is what has destroyed the middle class and what has allowed for everything to be made by slave labor in countries like China and other places in Asia. And that's what killed the manufacturing. And you could say, well, globalization was happening in the 90s and that would have happened anyways. That's probably true, but it accelerated it to the point where this is how we have Americans addicted to cheap bullshit that they probably don't even need. When we first started raising the money for Hat and Beard, I remember the analogy I used that I think was kind of what got the money behind it was, if you care about farm-to-table restaurants and fair trade coffee, right, you should also care where your records and books are made.
Yeah.
And if the Getty is making something like 90% of their books in China, you can say, oh, it's not slave labor. We went there and we witnessed it and they've got like whatever. It doesn't matter. The Chinese government owns all of those printers and is propping them up. If they don't have slave labor, then they have the other opposite effect, which is the government is propping up the subsidies to those printers so that they can undercut all democracies on earth to gain all of that business because they know that the greediness of the people at the top will lead to them making it in a totalitarian police state as opposed to a country that has democracy. And it's almost the antithesis of what the Marshall Plan was after World War II,
right,
where we rebuilt Germany and Japan. If you look at Germany and Japan, the reason they weather, you know, the 2000 financial crisis better than we do is because they're countries that still actually make stuff.
Yeah.
If you don't make stuff and you're just a country that consumes stuff, you're doomed. And I think the US and Britain, which were sort of the shining lights of World War II, have, for the sake of corporate buybacks and stock buybacks and stock price, have morally I don't think American capitalism is anything other than a morally bankrupt cesspool of greed at this point. And you see certain companies like ours that are trying to have some sort of ethical stance where it's not just China. I'm not trying to take it out on China. It's any totalitarian police state. We should not be making books or records or any product in a country that would lock up an artist or a musician for writing a song that is against whatever the government says.
And there's a lot of those now.
Yeah, there are. I mean, Turkey is kind of flirting with totalitarianism. Granted, Erdogan is, started off as a good guy. There was a coup a few years ago, and now he's just arrested the mayor of Istanbul, who was the only person who, probably could have beat him in a presidential election. It's not just Russia who are the boogeyman. I mean, obviously Putin is such a great villain that it's easy to sort of pigeonhole him. But I think a lot of people, including people in this country, are now starting to think, well, maybe authoritarianism is better for us because I can't afford to live and I can't afford to support my family. And maybe we should give up some of these freedoms and have a Donald Trump person in office. And it's sad because it sort of goes against the principles of the West and what democracy stands for. But how do you really justify that when you've propped up countries like Russia and China, and even Vietnam, a country we firebombed for 10 years, now make all the Gap's clothing? I mean, it's almost absurd. And I know that I'm kind of wading into these, this kind of geopolitical stuff, but it's because I make a product for a living. You can't make a product now and not look at this and go, we're fucked. Right. Because the truth is most Americans won't pay what the real price of something should cost. You're seeing it now even with Trump's fucking bullshit phones that he launched the Trump phone. And the whole thing was, we're not going to make it in China like the iPhone. We're going to make it here. Guess what? You can't make it here. The parts, the guy who started Shinola, who was an acquaintance of mine, who started Fossil Watch when he started Shinola in Detroit. The whole thing was, we're going to make it in Detroit. It was this kind of last gasp of, well, Detroit declared bankruptcy as a city. Let's move a company there. Let's hire 500 people. Let's pay them a living wage. They'll make watches. They'll make record players. They'll make whatever.
Right.
It turns out you can't do it. Maybe you can assemble them there, but you got to make some of the parts elsewhere. Yeah. So there's no perfect answer. But it is not that much of a difference. I mean, you have to work harder.
It's going to take a lot more people like you that are trying to get the money to the people that are actually make it, and especially the artist who wrote the book.
Yeah, and I think what I do think is encouraging is that most of the authors that we work with could do a book with a bigger publisher. It's more that they're doing it with us because of the creative freedom.
And the integrity.
And also they know that I'm not going to cheap out, and we're going to make the cloth bound hardcover. We're going to do the foil stamp. We're going to put the tipped image so that if you spend $50 on this, it actually feels like a piece of art.
And it's worth it.
Yeah. It's not just this thing that's mass produced.
It's a work of art
where we've created something that, and I don't blame the big publishers for staying in their lane. They have certain formats that work for them, and it allows them to have much better fixed costs for things. But, I have to say, I think that's why a lot of their books don't stand out. Whereas I get hired by a lot of big companies to package things because of the way our books look. Yeah. They'll buy them and say,
aesthetics.
Why does this look different than what these bigger publishers are doing? And I said, well, some of it is the adherence to materials and knowing how to pick the right stuff so that it feels like something special. None of our books, at least the art books, have a barcode. The first editions, we put a barcode sticker on the outside of the shrink wrap. So when you peel it off, at least for the first edition, it's like a piece of art. Yeah. It will become collector scum later. Some of our biggest books, this is probably one of our biggest books, and I hope to reprint it next year for the 10th anniversary. But it's a history of Slash magazine, which is before Slash, the label, which, gave us X and Faith No More and L7 and Los Lobos and Soul Coughing and so much good stuff in the 90s. Slash is only a magazine from 1977 to 1980. And if you watch Decline of Western Civilization Part 1, there's a
great
scene...
movie. If listeners out there, you got to see Part 1 and Part 2.
Yeah, there's a scene on a rooftop where Steve Samioff, the founder of Slash Magazine, or one of the founders, basically hands over the logo and the name to Bob Biggs, who then takes it over and creates the record label. The first single is The Germs. And Claude Bessy, this French national who was living in LA in the 70s, who went by the name Kick Boy, which was his punk name, I guess, for lack of a better term. I thought there was something, right to Kick Boy. He's in Decline of Western Civilization, and there's a great scene where he's on the roof and they're asking, what does new wave mean? And he's like, there is no such thing as new wave. It's just a made up term by the major labels to talk about what happens after punk. I guess now it may be referred to as post punk. But at the time, that's what they were calling that music, new wave. Yeah. Talking Heads, Devo. Because it wasn't straight 3-chord punk. It was something else.
More electronics and synths, too.
Yeah, Slash was an obscure magazine, but it was also a really interesting documentation of the time.
That's a really cool book, by the way.
And it's and so we reproduced almost all of the photos from the inside. There's Darby Crash when he's a teenager. Wow. But it really kind of shows you, there's Alice Bag, who's still performing to this day from the Bags. And, Billy Zoom from X.
There's a guy in there probably named Pat Smear.
Yes. Here's the Screamers, one of my favorite bands from that period who never released an album. KK Barrett is now one of the biggest production designers in Hollywood. We're actually finishing that book now. It started around the same time as this 10 years ago, and it's just KK's archive.
So that one's called Slash.
Yeah, Slash, a punk magazine from Los Angeles, 1977 to 1980.
I hope you enjoyed J.C. Gabel, The Cuts Are Nuts, Part 4. While you're waiting for Part 5, please go to hatandbeard.com and check out my favorite book of the day, File Under Slime. Artist and professor Christopher Mischlig's research characterizes slime as a pervasive, oozing cultural phenomenon. The appearance of slime in such films as The Blob, Ghostbusters, and Poltergeist are diligently and humorously analyzed. If slime can be readily deployed as a foil for thinking about thinking, which would have to be the ultimate aim of philosophy, it is entirely due to its objective, empirical faults. In other words, slime does not suggest itself as something to be thought about, but rather thought on. This is Malcolm Moore on the Creativity is the Cure podcast. Thanks for listening. Check out